Hey, how's it going? Thank you
Going
for
all right?
joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see everyone.
Okay. I think we may have a few stragglers coming in, but I think maybe we can get started. I think first, just to kind of introduce the group, this is something that we actually started at the beginning of the pandemic, like a year and a half ago. We were initially, I think, really interested in trying to understand the why of why we were seeing race-based differences with COVID infection and disease outcome. And I think with early media reporting, it felt like not a lot of people were willing to kind of explain the history and kind of talk about what had happened to create these disparities in the first place. This fall, we've transitioned more to a speaker series, and we've kind of shifted our role from more strictly based on the role of race and structure to kind of also think about narratives, both present day and historical. And so I think we're all super excited to have you here today. We've previously kind of talked about your work with GFR, as well as kind of the role of racial categories in medicine. So I'm just really excited to have you.
Great. Yeah, no, glad to be here. There are just for timing because it's helpful. My
Yeah.
wife is we're expecting our next child in like 39 weeks or approaching. No, we're at 39. So just so that as soon as I can get off, because
Yeah.
she's with the baby with our 3-year-old, and happy to stick around. She's gonna ask me how long is this gonna take.
I mean, however long you're able to give, we would be grateful
Okay.
for.
All right. Yeah, happy to talk. I'm excited to be here. When Brother Max sends a message, I respond, though sometimes I have to say no.
Totally understand. Guys, do you want to go around and just introduce yourselves really quick? Why don't we start with you, Ashveen? You're in my top corner.
Sure. Hi, I'm Ashveen. I'm a recent graduate from Seattle Pacific University, and we're all on the pre-med track, so I plan to be applying to med school next fall.
Great.
Johnny?
I'm Johnny Abraham. I'm a senior at Seattle Pacific University, and as well, I'm thinking to apply to medical school in a couple of years from now.
Mike?
Yeah, I'm Michael. I graduated from SPU in 2020, and I'm applying to medical schools right now.
Okay, Smith?
Hi, I'm Smith. I'm a sophomore at Harvard University concentrating in economics.
Great.
Okay, August?
Hi, I'm August, and I'm a senior in high school at the River Lake School.
Great.
And Abby?
Hi, my name is Abby. I'm a second-year medical student at UConn.
Great.
I was hoping we could kind of get started by talking about the role of medicine. I know that Professor Harris in Whiteness is Property kind of explained that creation of whiteness is this need for economic power, which led to labor demands, as well as the social construction of race, which was necessary in order to create this white identity and the idea of Black inferiority in order to justify slavery, which then became recognized by law in the 1660s. I know that Professor Harris kind of touched on craniology and the idea of blood as objective fact, but I was wondering if you could maybe touch on or expand on the role of science and medicine in constructing race and racial hierarchy and how this persists today.
Yeah, I will, but I'm actually going to talk about something else. Just hearing a lot of the folks that are here that are going to either apply to medical school or are applying to medical school, and then Abigail, who's in medical school. So I both sit on the admissions committee at UW, and I'm also faculty and dean at UW School of Medicine. And I'm actually just really excited that y'all do this convening, and you all are doing what I'm calling the cultural work. I like to consider myself a cultural worker because what when we talk about justice, we're talking about doing the work of culture that is a culture of justice, and it is in opposition to what has been a culture of injustice. But unfortunately, most of you are going to be applying to programs where it doesn't matter how much you know about everything else other than science, other than biology. And so at its core, if someone were to observe what y'all are doing, they'd say it's a waste of time. And what I would tell you is I need y'all to be exceptional in everything else that most of these folks are. That is, you get as close as you possibly can to that A, but as they always say, you have to work twice, 3 times, 4 times as hard, not because the work is harder, but it's because you also have to carry the weight of knowing everything else. So you're doing this work and that work. So it's double time, but you don't get paid double time. You actually get paid half. And I want to sit there because this is all nice. Like, this is cool. Like, it excites me that y'all get to have these critical conversations, these intellectual conversations. But it almost becomes irrelevant if the school gets to say, well, are they doing their classwork? Are they acing their exams? How are they doing on the rotation? The patients don't like them. They're not supporting their team. And so I want to just throw that out there first, is that we are a walking contradiction. You are trying to enter a space that has historically, contemporarily, and into the future oppressed people. That's a reality. It's a historical fact. And you're wanting to be a part of it. I'm going to assume here, because of the folks that are in the space and because I know Max, that you're trying to enter that space for the right reason. But just because you have the right reason doesn't mean that the space is necessarily the place that is going to receive that or accept that. And so you are going to be going up against a behemoth of institutions that is healthcare, that is medicine. But the contradiction is that you're walking into it, and I'm hoping full knowing of what it is and not being surprised by the racism you see. Because what I see in medical school is there's students that come in and say, I can't believe this. And I'm like, well, if you can't believe it, then that means you assumed that it was going to be different than what history has shown us, is that racism is racism wherever we go. And so your surprise to me means that there's some naivety of what is actually going on in society, and that you expected predominantly white institutions to act differently than they ever have. And that that surprise is a distraction, because then you react, you become a reactionary activist. Oh, well, I didn't like what you said here, and I'm going to react to you. Or they said so-and-so, or they said this thing, and it's offensive to me, and I can't believe it, and I'm going to react to that. Well, if you work with the deeply rooted organizers of the 60s and 70s, and even those today, they'll tell you, we have no place for reactionary work. Because a reaction just means that they dictate how you respond. Because it's a reaction. You didn't plan it. You weren't strategizing. You weren't contemplating what the move was. You just responded to what they said, what they did, or how they're treating you. But if you know that they behave this way, if you strategically understand how the system operates, it's no longer a surprise, and they can no longer distract you. And if you can't be distracted, that means they don't take your energy any longer. And if they can't steal your energy, that means you get to focus it on the communities that deserve it, which is the most oppressed, the most marginalized. But that takes some work. That takes getting to a place where and I'm not saying not to respond to racism. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying respond from a position of power. And sometimes it's not in the moment. Sometimes it's, oh, I see you acting out of pocket. I'm about to get you after I organize my people, after we have 100 folks that are ready to move. Not, oh, I took a video, look at this person, I put them on blast, I feel great about myself. If the goal of the revolution is to put someone on blast, we are going to lose. I know this isn't what I was brought here to talk about, but I'm saying that because I don't want you to get blindsided by the reality that the architects of the racism, at least the major architects of the racism that we see today, and that has been the vestige of the racism we've seen in the past, were the architects of medicine. It is there. It is imbued. It is rooted. It is cast into this system. And you have to be able to figure out, okay, is this worth my time? Do I have enough people behind me to make this work, to make this move? If not, nope. Because guess what? It'll happen again. I just don't need you to be the martyr by yourself to say, I'm here to fight the system, because let's be very clear, you're walking into the system of the 1%. Medical school is the ivory tower of ivory towers. Let's not dismiss that reality. It doesn't mean you can't do good work. What I'm suggesting is the good work doesn't necessarily happen in the medical school. There's work that takes place. Absolutely. We push it, you make it. My job as a dean, I believe, is to mitigate the harm that the school continuously produces. But the work I need to do happens outside of the medical school. It happens in the streets. It happens with the folks on the corners, on the blocks, the people shooting each other, the people who are unhoused, the people who are hungry, the immigrant communities that came here trying to make a living. That's where the work happens. You are gaining a skill. You going to medical school is you gaining a skill that the community can utilize. And in that process, you will be able to move things along. I just don't want you to think that somehow the fight exclusively exists in these ivory towers, because it doesn't. There's stuff happening at UW campus that folks in the community are like, what are you talking about? I haven't eaten for 3 days. And you're mad that your professor said blacks versus black people? Now, that is vernacular that should be addressed on an intellectual level without a doubt. But unless you're grounded in the work and in the people, then you're actually just intellectually engaging for the purposes of making ourselves feel good. Y'all are brilliant. That's a fact. But how do we utilize that for the benefit of folks that will never be stepping into the halls of a medical school? That's the question that I think we need to ask. And it helps us stay grounded so that we're not distracted. But to the question of Professor Harris and whiteness as property, I actually, so I teach a course at UW called Critical Race Theory in Medicine. And I have my students read that paper because I need them to contemplate, what does property mean? So I'm now going to ask you all, what is the definition of property? So for example, we know that voting rights, you have a right to vote, can be taken away in some states, in most states, if you are convicted of a felony, right? So the state takes your right away. And then you ask the question, well, what does it even mean to be a citizen of this country if you don't have the right to vote? What does it even mean to be a citizen? Is that a right? And I know it sounds esoteric, but I think it's important for us to really grasp, when we fully understand the rights of property, we can fully understand what whiteness has evolved to really encompass that. So what other ways might property rights be revoked or taken away? Well, what is the goal of theorizing whiteness as property? And the goal is to better understand, how is it that folks live in one society, but communities are living in a bifurcated experience, that is a completely different experience in the exact same society? And you say, oh, because some people have the rights to do so and others don't. And interestingly, rights are bestowed upon individuals. in property, you are bestowed the right when you sign the grand deed. You don't have the right before then. And you can extrapolate and say, well, you perhaps have the right to property as whiteness as property the moment it is the assimilation into whiteness, knowing that it will be a protective element. And in that assimilation, you say, okay, well, I'll take it. And I get why people take it, because why would you want to be treated otherwise? As a white, why would a white person want to say, treat me as a black person? And I'm not talking about Rachel Dolezal. She convinced people she was black. I'm saying a white person saying, treat me like a black person. We haven't seen that story yet. And there's many poor white folks say, well, Edwin, I grew up poor. Yeah, that's a struggle. That's a real struggle. I am not denouncing that struggle. But that struggle was not because of your race. It wasn't because of the oppression of racial hierarchies. It was because of the exploitative, extractive nature of racial capitalism in this country that put you at the bottom of the economic totem pole and told you needed to blame black and brown people. So unless we fully grasp what the source of power is, then we start conflating struggles and say, well, I've struggled, I was poor. I struggled, I was an immigrant. I struggled, and it's like, yeah, we ain't talking about the same thing. I'm not saying racism somehow is at the top of it. What I'm saying is it's different. What is different and what's historically true is that it has lasted longer than many struggles folks talk about in this country, but not longer than perhaps the experience and oppression of Native Indigenous folks here. But then you can start getting into the place of oppression Olympics, and you're like, well, my struggle is harder and you should do my struggle, and or we need this. And it's like, or we can really figure out what solidarity means and what it means for white folks to non-white folks to say, yeah, I'm down. How do I stand in solidarity with you? And this paper is not talking about that, but I bring it up because there's many folks that say, well, what do I need to do, Edwin? Like, how many more books do I need to read? And I'm like, no, you just need to do the work. Like the abolitionists from the 1800s who were white folks weren't like, how many more books do I need to read? They were like, I'm an abolitionist. We need to end slavery and black people need to be free and they have the right to live amongst us freely. And I want to make the distinction that abolition is different than anti-slavery. Abraham Lincoln was an anti-slavery person. He said, I don't believe we should have slavery. The reasons for that were because he wanted to protect the Union so that the North can have power to dominate the South. He was also part of the American Colonization Society, where he went with F. Scott Key, who wrote the Star Spangled Banner, and they went down to an island off of Haiti, signed a contract just less than a month before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, so that he can send free black folks there and colonize that island because they didn't want free black folks in the United States. He didn't care about black folks. He wouldn't even let his daughter marry a black person. He said it in a public speech running for president, and they cheered him on. His goal was to protect the Union, and the Union is white. He also wanted to make sure that the Southerners couldn't use slaves as the soldiers to fight against the Union. So that was a strategic move. The abolitionists were very much different. And Abraham Lincoln never called himself an abolitionist. He said we should end slavery again, but we are not the same. Abolitionists were like, no, we not only are the same, but we are replicating the dehumanization that has happened across the world, and we can't stand for it. I'm not saying white folks are the answer, the ones who are going to free us. What I'm saying is there's a clear map of what being in solidarity means, but we tend to forget it because it requires a lot of sacrifice for white folks. And so I answered your question and a bit more, but happy to answer any other questions.
I think for me, I was mainly really interested in if you could maybe expand on the role of medicine specifically in this,
In which part? In the role of medicine
in creating whiteness as property.
yeah.
I know it's probably a really big answer.
No, it's not. It's just, so I want to be clear. So whiteness as property is, it's a theoretical framework to understand, right? And so whiteness of property would be a good application of understanding, no matter where you look on the historical spectrum.
Mhm.
Medicine's role is being the architect of taking what started off as the oppression at the hands of religious tenor. So it was the Portuguese that came to West Africa with the Bible in hand. And if you know the story of Ham and Canaan, the story of Ham and Canaan says that there is a cursed people on this planet. Those cursed people will be the slaves of the slaves of the slaves. Well, the Portuguese came to West Africa. They needed slaves, and they just so happened to rationalize that, oh, well, these must be the cursed people because they're Black. It wasn't an accident. They were looking for it. They just rationalized it under the religious doctrine of the King James Bible. So that happened. Folks were being brought to North America for chattel slavery forcibly. And you started having people questioning, because they were so religious. They're saying, well, shouldn't we baptize these people and convert them to our religion? Don't we want to strengthen our religious belief and our followers? I mean, we are evangelical. Our goal is to convert everyone. And so now they had a contradiction, because the slave owners were like, well, I don't really want to be able to classify them as human beings, because then that is incongruent with their supposed religious and ethical morale. And there was others that are like, but we have to. If we're saying we are followers of Christ, we need to convert them to our following, because if not, what are they? Well, as they've described throughout history, they've declared them to be savages. They declared them to be inhumane. They've declared them to be everything other than human. And then science came in under the guise of religion and said, God has bestowed upon us the skill to observe the world in the scientific way. And what we found was that there's people here that are inferior to Europeans. Oh, interesting. Yeah, and they all happen to be melanated people. And poor white folks. And when you combine that, it was a perfect logical step for this arc of othering and this arc of marginalization, because it was medicine that then said, oh, we are different. And we're not just different spiritually. We're different physiologically, biologically, and culturally. And because of those reasons, we can't possibly be interacting with each other. So if you fast forward to the Jim Crow era, you had separate water fountains, separate schools, couldn't eat at the same counters, couldn't sit at the same part of the bus. The only rationale for that is that you believed that these folks were inferior to you in all the ways I just described. Because if you didn't believe that, then why would you be separating yourself from them? Why would you be saying those folks aren't allowed to interact with us? It's because, and I said it from the beginning, it's also because a conversation of culture. There is a culture of power. There's a culture of hierarchy. There's a culture of maintaining the economic privilege that is taking place, even when they didn't actually have it. So thinking of Jim Crow era, you had James Baldwin that said, this is the wildest perception that's ever taken place. But you have poor white folks that hate me. I make more money than them. And I tell them, look, what's going on? And their response is, well, at least I'm not Black. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? And it's not, oh, at least I don't look like you. What they're suggesting is, at least I'm not what medicine and science has told us, all these biologically, physiologically, culturally inferior suggestions. And so it's not an accident that we see the racism we see today. It's a multi-generational conditioning. And with that, it does require, we're at war of cultures. Again, cultures of not, oh, you speak a different language. I'm talking about culture of what is just. And some people say, oh, America will never achieve it because it's not homogenous. And all the homogenous countries in Europe and in Asia, they succeed because everyone is the same. I'd make the argument, well, we would succeed if there wasn't groups of people that thought they needed to be at the top. And then rig the game so that other folks would never actually get to the top. And then say, see, I told you, you can't make it. So we are different. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy and cycle that is used for science, because in data, you're never actually critical of the data points. You're only critical of the aggregate of the data. And so if you never ask, but where did this data come from? You just say, oh yeah, no, this is data. Data's data. It's indifferent. Okay, well, if the data comes from everyone that's in the South and they believe that they should detract and create their own country, then yeah, it is an 80% approval rate for that. They also probably believe slavery wasn't a terrible thing. At least there's some research that suggests they believe that. So I think as you get into your fields, it's also having the skill to ask the question, why? And asking the ontological question of, why are we even asking this question? Why is this the research question? And many of your colleagues who are biologists or microbiologists, they're going to be like, that's not your job. Right? They're going to be like, no. You don't get to ask why we're asking this question. But I'll tell you right now, and I don't even know what the research question is, it's because they're getting money for it. Because the money that they're getting is saying, we'd like to find out more about this. And the more isn't, we want to find out more about this so we can solve the issues of marginalization or inequities. They're saying, I just want to have, and this is going to sound bad, but it's really what some of us scholars call the disparity pornography of data research, which is keep telling me how bad it is for these people. I want more of it. Tell me more. I'll give you more money if you tell me how bad it is. And folks are like, it's been bad. I don't know why we need more research. Like, who's going to give the money to say, can you eliminate this problem? Who's going to organize to stop this harm from occurring? Who's going to prevent type 2 diabetes because poverty is the leading factor for it? Oh, well, Edwin, that's not our problem. Those are policy decisions that we can't really have a part of. Okay, then what are you actually researching? Oh, what you're researching is you want to put a responsibility on the physiology of the individual who was harmed by racism and say there's something wrong with your body. And how do we fix your body to withstand the racism that exists in the world? That's what we're really asking. And we have to push back against it and say, no, actually, I'm not doing that. And thankfully, I'm in a position now where I get asked to analyze data, review it, take a look at it. And I'm like, you shouldn't be asking this question. They're like, Edwin, we spent 5 years doing it. I was, yeah, well, you asked me 5 years too late. So you can publish this data. I'm not going to be a part of it. And if you publish this, I'm going to say something about it, and I will publish something myself. Now, I'm not asking you to be the vanguard and like go out there and fight every fight, but it's knowing which ones you have the leverage and power to do. And early in your career, that's hard to do. You're like, God, I gotta do this thing. I'm not really interested in it, or I don't think we're asking the right questions. But can you leverage that information or that knowledge that you're gaining so that it can be used to actually get to the place that exposes the things that folks need to know about? Again, that takes work, but I think it's you understanding where your line is and saying, we're getting really close to crossing my line of what is just. And when it is crossed, then the question is it crossed and not coming back? Or is it crossed indefinitely and I need to do something about it? Those, again, are contemplative questions that I think we have to wrestle with, and they're not easy.
So along the same lines, like in medical school as a medical student, or like as we go on towards this path, how do you think the role of a physician can improve then? Like how should we face or like counteract maybe like professional colleagues or even patients that maybe see this point of view that you don't agree with?
Yeah, well, you're going into a profession where you don't get to tell the patient what to do. And I would make the argument, if you're actually about this work, then you're both serving the patient who is racist towards you, knowing that that's your job, right? It's a difficult position to be in. And there's a lot of, no, I would never. Guess what? When that person who has a swastika on their chest is rolled into the ER, you are going to save their life or you are going to lose your job. There's no, oh, well, I don't feel great about this. This person has a swastika on their chest. You signed up for this. And also, that's not where the work happens, right? The work doesn't happen because you convince the patient that they're racist. Of course they are. Again, let's not be surprised that you have racist patients. Let's be surprised with the work that we do, in that they have to keep coming back to you because you are the best person at your job. That they have to be like, geez, I have to go back and see Ashvin. I mean, and excuse, let's say they say something racist. And yeah, you check them, you say, I'm sorry, sir, that is not who I am. I'm going to ask that we maintain this relationship professionally. But if you continue to talk about the way I look or my name or my religion, then I don't know if I'll be able to serve you any longer. That's the conversation. It's not, patient Johnson, can I explain to you how what you just said was racist? Patient Johnson's like, I don't care. I'm paying for this service. The economic model here is for not. Now, if you have rapport with them, maybe there's something to change. But I say that because I want to be clear that, and this may not be true for everyone, but I treat my job as a job. It is a job that I try to do good work in, but it's not my life's work. And if your goal is to change communities' outcomes, again, you're going to have to work double time. You're going to have to be the one that goes into community. You're going to have to be the one that shows up to the community events, to the community organizing meetings, and say, hey, I just want to let you know I'm the local ER doc. And if something happens, here's my number. Just text me. That's not part of a system. The system's not doing that. Now, a good system would just say, okay, Ashvin, you do what you do. We appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing that. We can't really do anything with it, but we support you. That happens. I see that. But as far as the patient, I mean, it happened with my wife, Dr. Estelle Williams. She's a Black surgeon. She was a resident. She was a chief resident. And she was walking in to see a patient she was going to do the surgery on. And he was like, no, you ain't doing my surgery. He was an old white dude. He's like, you're not doing my surgery. She's like, I'm sorry, sir. What do you mean? And he's like, you're Black. You're not doing my surgery. And she was like, oh, well, that's interesting because I'm the only person on call. So if you want your surgery, I'm doing your surgery. And he's like, nope, I don't want to do it. She want to go talk to her attending. She was like, look, I don't really care. He can go, he cannot go. I'll do the surgery. He's going to be under anesthesia. Like this person needs X, Y, and Z. I'm the only one here. Attending came in, went to the patient and said, excuse me, sir. If you don't do the surgery, I'm transferring you to another hospital. So the reason I don't like to explain things to white folks who commit acts of racism is because they get to steal my energy. And I want to choose when I give them my energy. But if it happens and I'm like, oh, I gotta explain it to them. No, you don't. You say, look, you crossed the line. Here it is. What do you mean I crossed the line? I'm not really here to have a conversation. You crossed the line. I'm going to say, you can either stop talking about my name, my religion, or the way I look, or I'm going to ask to transfer you to another provider and or another patient. You may not even be able to stay in this hospital. Let them try to, wait, what happened? Did I do something wrong? Yeah, no shit, Sherlock, you did. But let them figure that out, because guess what? They put the onus on you to explain it to them. And it's, again, your energy. Now, if they choose to stay, that says to me, okay, you're willing to engage. Again, not to change their mind, but they're willing to engage. And if they say, I'm really unclear of what I did, well, let me break it down for you, at least in the next 5 minutes. You talking about the way I look is incredibly offensive. I'm here to do a job, which is to take care of you. And you talking about the way I look or speaking of my background or religion is becoming distracting, incredibly offensive, and is racist. But I'm here to do a job, and that's what I'm going to do. And then let them, I don't really like this provider. This provider says that I'm racist. Whatever, go find another one. Right? But it may seem semantic, but it's moving from a place of saying, I can't believe this person did this. I'm offended, to a place of, I hold power, and in my power, I'm not going to deal with your bullshit. And so you deal with it. And I'm going to do that very kindly and with big words, but you're going to know that I am not happy, and you're going to know that there's going to be a change in tenor in the way that I talk to you, but I will still do the best possible job I can. That's a hard, again, you're entering into a hard profession, because you will deal with many of those contradictions, because there's going to be a lot of people you don't like. A ton. There's going to be a lot of people that are racist. The question is, how do you manage it? If you were in any other profession, yeah, you can scream, you can send a screenshot of, look at this patient is racist. You can't do that. You're a doctor. It's against the law to share information about the patient. So there you are now. I want you all to get prepared. If you are entering into a space that I want you to own the power, you are powerful. I get tired of hearing folks saying like, oh, we don't have power. And it's like, no, it's just, we don't organize. That's the problem. If we didn't have power, the Black Panther Party wouldn't be the #1 enemy of the state in the 1970s. If we didn't have power, Angela Davis wouldn't have been fired from UC Berkeley because of the radical thinking that she had. If we didn't have power, you wouldn't have had slaves leading slave revolts to get their freedom. We have power, except what those folks did is they organized. And the key word is, we have power. Individually, you're really no different than the other folks. White folks individually don't have more power. They just organize better than we do. They make the phone call. Hey, my son wants to go to your school. Can you interview him? Yeah, sure. Okay. Again, it's a blanket statement. I'm not saying everyone does that, but we see at many of the major universities, it's part of the game. So the question is, do we play the game for assimilation, or do we play the game to deconstruct? Either way, you're playing the game, and you need to be really good at it.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Can you believe it's almost an hour?
Wow. Does anyone have any last questions? I don't want to take up too much of your time.
No, you're good. I think we can go a little past 7, but happy to answer. I definitely want to hear from other folks.
So previously you were mentioning how white residual property and both the idea of having biological differences reinforced the idea of excluding those that basically were not white, and is therefore even over time, as we see right now after the abolition of slavery, the exclusion from their white identity perceived in biased research studies and clinical performances done on patients of color. Is that the historical connection, like the ones that was made in the past, that over time exacerbated and went inside the medical field? And I was wondering if therefore, like, that really made me reflect on the Tuskegee study, as well as the Henrietta Lacks cell line, and the idea of property that in the past African Americans did not own because they were enslaved, and then Henrietta Lacks not even being able to own and have a ward, or the family not even allowing the consent to perform the study on her cell line, and of course the African Americans in the Tuskegee study to own their own health after the discovery of the penicillin against syphilis.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think what you're touching on is perhaps another stick of the bundle of rights, which is white folks hold the expectation, right? Rights equaling the expectation to utilize, exploit, and torment Black folks whenever they would like, which we see today with the use of over-policing in communities and broken windows laws, and white folks calling Black men walking their dog in New York City Central Park because she asked him or he asked her to leash her dog, which was Amy Cooper, right? Those are rights, the right of, I have the right to torment you, I have the right to cause you harm, because society has structured it that way. So you're right, yeah, with those experiments, it was, we have the right to experiment on Black folks indefinitely and in perpetuity without even providing them the solution when we created it. Right, that's what happened with syphilis and the Tuskegee massacre. And I want to be clear, I use the language is incredibly important. I use the language, the Tuskegee massacre, because experiments suggest that it was in the vein of even resembling science when it was an intentional act of genocide. When you choose, and the definition of genocide is the killing of a group of people because of who they are. In this case, Black folks. These Black men died when they could have not have died, right? So that was a knowing act of violence and murder. But yeah, but it's part of that expectation. It's part of that. Of course we could do that, because would they ever do that on white folks? No, they never have. There is no scientific experiment that was ever done in this country that was done to white folks for the purposes of exploring the scientific edges of medicine. But if you think about it, it's always the most marginalized, it's the most oppressed. You think of Nazi Germany, you had experiments done on Jewish folks who Nazi Germany put at the rung of saying, these aren't even human beings, and therefore we can treat them as such. But this is the interesting part, and I have this conversation with many Jewish folks, is how there isn't a clear solidarity of white Jewish folks with Black folks in the struggle for liberation. But many of them, and they can come at me, and they have assimilated into whiteness, right? They have assimilated and said, no, I get the choice. I'd rather be treated like this than like that. And that's what occurred in this country for many white folks. I mean, you have folks here that were German, Irish, Italian, Russian, came here during the 1910, 1920s. That time you had a lot of building, a lot of reconstruction of inner cities. And so these immigrants came and helped build the country. Well, you see a point in the 1930s in the prison rolls, where before 1930, the prison rolls said I for Italian, R for Russian, J for Jewish, G for German. And then after the 1930s, it all became white. All W's. Well, what happened in the 1930s? The Great Depression. Great Depression hit. After the Great Depression, they were effectively asked, though not to their face, by society, do you want to be treated like Black people, or do you want to be white? And what was the choice? The choice was, well, damn, I'll be white. But in that process, it was a dehumanizing process for these European, culturally European folks who gave up and lost their identity, sold it off in exchange for whiteness. That's a devastating fact. And you know it's true because you ask white folks, oh, where are you from? And they're like, oh, I'm from San Jose. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, where are you from? And they're like, oh, well, my dad came from Boston. Okay, let's clarify. Outside of the US, where's your family from? Well, I don't know. I'm a mutt. No, that's not a thing. There's no mutts. Mutt is not a country, region, or place in this world. Well, I think my dad's German and my mom's British. You think, or you so you don't know, right? What I'm saying is there's people here that don't even know who they are, but have the audacity to suggest that they know who everyone else is. And when you don't have culture, because that was what it was, they gave up culture in exchange for whiteness. Whiteness is not a culture. The US doesn't have a culture. Eating hot dogs and singing the national anthem is not a culture. That's the biggest fraud of this country, is that there is no culture. It could have had culture in the body of the beautiful immigrants that came to this country, but it doesn't want to allow that. So it doesn't actually have culture. And what we know is that culture heals. If you think about indigenous people, if you think about Latinx folks, of Black folks, their work of culture is the answer to healing, the answer of building across differences. But this country doesn't hold it. And so because it was sold off in exchange for whiteness, I now have to have conversations with folks who don't know who they are, but want to debate me on racism. And my response always is, I first need you to figure out what you used to eat and what part of this world you're from and what language you spoke and how did you all adjudicate problems among communities? Because I guarantee you it didn't look like this. And that's also why I think there's an adamant hatred towards indigenous folks, because many of these folks don't know their own indigeneity. And if you don't know yours, why would you ever love someone else's? So that's the bigger work, but part of that conversation is understanding racism, understanding what those relationships or lack thereof look like.
Thank you, Professor Lindo.
Yeah.
Also for the connection with, international perspective with Nazi Germany and the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Smith or August, did you have a question?
Yes, I did have a question. So part of my question was already covered, but a quote from Harris where she says, becoming white meant gaining access to a whole set of public and private privileges that materially and permanently guaranteed basic subsistence needs and therefore survival. Becoming white increased the possibility of controlling critical aspects of one's life rather than being the object of others' domination. So when looking at that, I really was drawn into the piece where it says controlling critical aspects of one's life. And in our work as pre-meds, looking to go into medicine, and dismantling the system of oppression and the systematic racism we see, where we're trying to not only, I guess, create access for all, but create a system where people have control of their needs and their necessities. What would you say our role is in doing that?
I think our role is to get out of the way. What I mean by that is, again, we are entering the spaces of the most preeminent spaces intellectually, economically, and otherwise. We are becoming part of the work of the system. because the system has conditioned us to figure out how do we survive to provide for our family. I mean, that's why I went to law school, was to buy a house for my dad. And I did. And then after I bought the house for my dad, I'm like, so what am I actually doing this for? Because you don't ever actually make it out. You're still going to be a Black woman. My wife is still a Black woman. I'm still a brown, indigenous Nicaragüense. Like that is what it is. My law degree is not going to stop a bullet because I put it up and told the cop, hey, I'm a lawyer. Yeah, sure you are, which I've heard many of times. But I think, and so what I mean by get out of the way, I mean, I see my work going to law school, doing this work as kind of doing the work of Robin Hood, of being in the spaces to extract, steal, and gather knowledge and skills so that they can be imparted, they can be shared, and almost share the secrets of how it works. Because when you can understand how it works, you can maneuver it with less harm to you. And the hope is, my hope, is that when you get in there, you get to tweak it in ways that's different. But I want to be clear, you're not going to dismantle medicine. That's not my goal. Medicine is going to be dismantled because we dismantle the systems around it. And therefore, medicine has to respond to that. But if the goal is to dismantle medicine, that means you first need to actually dismantle capitalism, because the medicine that we have today is at the behest of exploitative capitalism. But if we're trying to do that, then we have to fully grasp, well, how do our taxes work? How does the disproportionality of some folks paying, other folks not, in the highest tax brackets? And then you got folks who are like, I got so much money, I'm going to space by myself. I'm going to take the HOV lane. So I don't want you to put the burden on yourself that somehow it is your responsibility to deconstruct this system. I think it is your responsibility to gain as much of the inside knowledge as possible so that the next group of folks can take what you did and then run with it and change it. And some people say, well, that seems weird. Edwin, you're saying like you're an activist and you've done these things and you've done. Yeah, I have. Because strategically, that was the thing we needed to do at the moment. Now, if you wanted to, the folks who need to tear down medicine are the folks who aren't in medicine. Because y'all are trying to be doctors. Let's right. This is the contradiction. How are you going to tear down the thing that you need to become a doctor? And it sounds terrible. You're like, well, but what if the thing's oppressive? It's like, I mean, yeah, it's been oppressive. How do you get through it again, with the least amount of harm, still preserving your dignity and your humanity and your values, and get out the other end? I feel I did it. I went through law school and they're like, damn it, he tricked us. I thought he was going to do corporate law and he was going to go do X, Y, and Z. Shucks. But that was my goal, is, all right, can I make it in here and want them to think like, oh, he's so smart, he's this and that. And did they put me on magazines? Sure. Did they ask me to do these talks? Sure. Did I do it? Yeah. But I did it because I wanted them now to be associated with the most radical thing they had ever been a part of, and they didn't even know it. So they were using me to extract my story. I was using them to get power, and I got the better end of the deal. And so some people are like, oh, I can't believe so-and-so was used for, we don't know what their strategy was. Maybe they wanted to be on the front page of that cover. I think most folks, unfortunately, don't have a full strategy when they're doing that. They're like, oh, wow, I want to be on the cover. Great. I'll tweet about it, or I put it on Instagram. See, look at me. Where now I would be like, oh, you want to use my picture? Cool. You're going to pay me. Here's a contract. Oh, well, you're a student here, and okay, you don't have to use my picture. Like, I'm glad I'm here. It's just, you can't use my picture unless you pay me, or you put the money towards a fund for the BSU, or whatever you want to do. But do you notice, just by saying the word pay me, I've created leverage, because they know that they probably should. but you also have to understand how leverage works. And that's all organizing is. That's what Dr. King did. Dr. King and Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, all they did was create leverage where it never existed. And you do that by a number of different avenues. One is storytelling. 2 is organizing people. And 3 is understanding the weaknesses of your enemy. And when you understand their weaknesses, you now have the leverage of their weakness. And if their weakness is that they need you to show the diversity of their student body, great. I'm willing to exchange that for X, Y, and Z. Now, they may say no, but imagine if all the Black students and all the Latino students said, oh yeah, actually, you can't take pictures or use any of the pictures that we're in unless we get X, Y, and Z. Now, I'm not saying go back and go do that. I'm just giving an example of how we create leverage in situations we think we don't have and get away from the language of we don't have power. No, we have power. Again, question is, do we know it? Do we organize for it? And do we utilize it? And then not everything requires a fight. It just doesn't. So I need you to pick your fights. It's not that it doesn't require a fight because it's not worthy of a fight. It's just not worthy of you. And so you're like, I'm not saying don't forget it. Take note. When that thing happens, that racist thing happens, take your notebook out. On this day, this thing happened. And then write the next one and the next one. And you're like, this shit is piling up. But there's going to be one that breaks the barrier of what that value set is. And then you say, oh yeah, we have a problem. Y'all crossed the line. And then you figure out, again, strategically organizing how you want to move on that. But then you also have receipts of what was going on. Because what whiteness likes to do, and it gets to hide itself behind the world of statistics and research and data, is say, well, this must just be an anomaly. It hasn't happened before. No, actually it has. And I've documented it. And these are contemporaneous. When it happened, I took it. There's a timestamp. How do you, and some people say, geez, do I really have to think about that? And I love that you all, and I can see it, you all read this piece. But I want you to work on the tool and the skill of dialectical critical thinking. What that means is that this piece you read isn't the finale. This piece you read isn't even necessarily the answers, but this piece is a point of information that can then help you figure out how you ask better questions of the world. But a lot of people read and they're like, oh, this is amazing, unbelievable. Like the answers are in here, and then it gets tweeted on social media, and it's like, yeah, look at this. Like, that's the beginning. Like I was listening to some talk and they were like, the work of liberation is the work of study. And that study is the praxis. Praxis means that your theory informs your actions and your work, and that your work and actions inform your theory. If you just think, then you are a theorist. That's all you're doing. You're just thinking about the problem, which many biomedical researchers do. If you are an activist, if you are just an actor, then Paulo Freire, an amazing education philosopher, says, then that's all you're doing is you're acting, you're a reactionary. You're not informed by history or by context or by conditions. You're just acting because you want to. You're like, oh, I didn't like this thing, I'm reacting. It's the folks that say, I know my history. I know how this pans out. I know the conditions. I know why you're doing this. And now I can move. Oh, but I moved this way, and this was a response that maybe I didn't expect. That's going to have to go back, and now I'm going to have to learn more about liberatory philosophy or liberatory psychology, because I'm struggling with this psychological component of it. And now all of a sudden, your study informs how you move, and how you move informs how you study. But that's very different than the multiple choice questions you have in biochem. Right? It's very different. That's the one-liner. And that's what I'm saying. You have to be exceptionally good at that, while simultaneously, not at the expense of, simultaneously being able to read the Professor Harris piece, dissecting it, writing in the margins, coming up with great questions like August, and saying, and I want the questions to come not from the paper and saying, oh, Professor Harris said this, can you elaborate? But the questions being, Professor Harris said this, and knowing how history works, this is my understanding of how this pans out. Does that mean that racism, if it's, and I'm just thinking about this on the spot, if racism, or sorry, if whiteness is property, then who is going to commit the eminent domain of that property? Now say, wow, you thought about this, you did some homework, and now you're thinking in places that expands. Because every time a scholar, we write something, it's not because I'm trying to get, or let me rephrase, there's some scholars who write some who think that they are the answer. I write things believing that I'm informing a process that you are on, a journey you are on, to be able to utilize it to say, wow, this is a springboard. I can move on from, I can analyze my way to another place so you can think about the world differently. And this will be the last thing I say, is that this work is really the work of the imagination, because this justice that we're talking about, we've never actually seen it before. We've never seen it before. And if we haven't seen it before, then that means we have to make it up. Just like a comic book writer, or just like an artist who gets inspired by the conditions around them. How do you make up the world of justice that we've never seen before? Where you get inspired by the things that you surround yourself by the things that you read, right? Who's going to be the one that thinks up the new economic theory that is not capitalism, that isn't Marxism, but is something else? Who's the one that thinks of an economic model for medicine that isn't single payer, but that isn't the model we have now, where we have insurance companies and some folks say it's single payer. What if it's not single payer? What if you can imagine the other place? And that means it's not on this planet. It's not in this world. And you're using a muscle that science does not prepare you to utilize, and it doesn't actually ever expect you to utilize. But when you do, you start finding some fascinating spaces, which is actually no different than science, because the work of science is not to find truth. The work of science is doing the work of finding something that is truer than the thing we know of last time. But if you look at the scientific method, it's not to find truth. It's to test an hypothesis. The hypothesis is based on what we believe is true today. But we're testing it with a new theory that potentially something else could be true. That's a beautiful thing. That's an amazing process. But why aren't we able and capable of doing that when we talk about justice, when we talk about health equity, or we talk about a number of different things that we discussed today? I would argue because there isn't an economic incentive to do so. So how do you do it without that incentive? To me, it's just the excitement of dreaming up that new world. But not everyone is as excited as I am, but it's a fun place to explore.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. I think that'd be a really, I think that's a really hopeful and kind of beautiful place to kind of end on. I mean, thank you for spending the time with us, and for reminding us of the need to keep doing the work, and also kind of, I think, helping us maybe mentally prepare for the institutions that we're hoping to enter.
Yeah, for sure. It was an honor to be here with you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Lindo.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
absolutely. Good to meet y'all. Will y'all be good? I'm going to get back to these babies.
Awesome. Thank you again.
All right, y'all. Bye.